wanted to kiss you since the first day that I met you. Sorry. No.
After her husband Corey left the Marines, Sydney's life took a turn and is afraid for their family's future. They just moved into a new house but still feels uncertain on what's ahead for them. She even feels more anxious as she needs to see a doctor for her health problem. But she feels even more upset when her husband is looking more into the expense of her treatment rather than giving her emotional support.
Settle, then we'll get you to a doctor. Hopefully it won't cost too much.
Despite of her illness, Sydney practices a healthy lifestyle as she is actually into sports. One night, as she went out to run, she suddenly collapsed and was unconscious. Then out of nowhere, someone performed CPR until she regained consciousness, but this person left. After that incident, Sydney went to her doctor and unfortunately got the news that she does have thyroid cancer. This needs proper treatment to avoid the cancer to spread out, but this leaves Sydney disappointed as she knows Corey can't afford the treatment and he doesn't even have insurance. This leads to an argument between Sydney and Corey as she wants to look for a job as a writer to help with the treatment, but can't find someone to look after their son. Sydney decides to write again and maybe her novel gets to be published. But as she finished writing, Corey doesn't even care to read her work, but instead told her he might get a promotion. This makes Sydney upset since she never felt Corey's support. Sydney with her son went to a park, then meets Jane, a single mom with two sons. It's like two strangers met for the first time, but felt as if they knew each other for years. And luckily, Jane just lived opposite of Sydney's house and they are actually neighbors. They both love to read books. Jane gets excited when she knew Sydney is actually a writer, and this was the start of their friendship. Sydney even shared to Jane the novel she's been working on and gave compliment that she never got from Corey. And this friendship becomes an everyday routine for the two women as they spend more time together. Corey tries to be sweet again on Sydney, but this only irritates his wife as they end up arguing. That night, Jane came to see Sydney, but was surprised to see Corey instead. Jane begins to show how she appreciates Sydney by sending gifts, and this really made Sydney feel she is special to her, and that makes Corey jealous. Sydney did try to not show what she really feels for Jane, but she can no longer fight over what she feels. She then went to see Jane and reveal her true feelings that the moment she first saw Jane, she really wanted to kiss her. Jane was stunned at first and doesn't know how to react. Sydney felt as if she offended Jane and insists she has to say something. There is a revelation as well for Jane that she was actually the person who performed CPR during the time Sydney lost consciousness, and she doesn't want Sydney to know about this since she wants Sydney to fall in love with her. The revelation did not change Jane how she sees Sydney, and she even spent more time with her. Jane even goes with Sydney whenever she has her treatment. Sydney felt the love and care from Jane instead of her husband who is always at work and doesn't even bother to ask how she is doing. Sydney gets the chance to ask personal questions to Jane, especially about her husband who is actually in jail. That is why she considers herself a single mom with two kids, and this made Jane upset and doesn't want to talk about her husband. Sydney and her son spend the night at Jane's house as Corey is out of town. That night was their first kiss, but was interrupted by Sydney's son. Sydney knows deep within her that she is getting weak due to her illness, but still wants to live life to the fullest. Sydney decides not to see Jane for a couple of weeks, then suddenly went to visit her. This made Jane upset as her son keeps on asking about Sydney, but she didn't see them for quite some time. Then they shared again a kiss, but Jane told her to stop and just leave. But this roller coaster of emotions just let the two women realize that they do love each other and they finally made love for the first time. Sydney finally decides to leave Corey and file for divorce. Corey has no idea about Sydney's relationship with Jane, so he didn't know where to look for Sydney and their son. But he went to see Jane and asked her if she does know where is Sydney. The night Sydney came and told Jane they can leave and start a new life and she can look for a job and find an agent and publisher for her novel. As Corey is still confused with what happened, he then finally realized that Sydney is with Jane as he reads Sydney's novel and seems like it talks about being a lesbian. He confronts Jane and gets so mad at her and even ripped the jacket she is wearing since it's Sydney's. Jane tells Corey that she loves Sydney and that Sydney loves her too. As the two women continue to live together, Sydney tells Jane she has finally found an agent and that she only needs to finish her novel to be published. But she needs to be alone to focus. Sydney left and spent her time alone as she works on her novel. Jane and even Corey had no idea that Sydney is actually getting weaker and weaker. Corey got a call that Sydney was found dead. During Sydney's funeral, Jane came and was so devastated. She tells Corey and everyone that she loves Sydney. After quite some time, Jane realized that she has to move on with her life without Sydney. She starts with her new work, and Corey left with his son to start a new life away from Sydney's memory in that neighborhood with Jane.
Want more queer content? Then please subscribe and hit the notification bell.